everyone! So I read 7.5 books in July 2021 and 2 of them were so touching and so good that they made me cry. If you want to know which books they are, then keep watching to find out. Starting with the fiction books, the first book that I read in July was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by 𝙒𝙎𝙈𝙈𝙀, which is a story about how a girl named Addie makes a fortune bargain with the devil to live forever, but is cursed to be forgotten by everyone she meets. My favorite quote from the book was, "Life can feel very long sometimes, but in the end, it goes so fast." If I had to summarize this book in one sentence, it would be pretty writing about pretty people. That's it. I just could not stand Addie, who has to be one of the most ungrateful and self-absorbed characters I've ever had the displeasure of reading. She basically spent 300 years living like a 23-year-old college student, whining and wallowing in self-pity, getting drunk, and having one-night stands. I would give The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue 2 out of 5 stars. There was so much potential in the premise of making a fortune bargain with the devil for eternal youth, but if you want something better, I would recommend that you try reading Oscar Wilde's Picture of Dorian Gray. Moving on to the second book that I read was A Little Life by 𝙎𝙄𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏𝙎. Guys, I think this may be the best book I've read this year, and the year's not even over yet. It's a story of 4 guys in New York and how their relationships evolve as they grapple with fame, money, addiction, success, and trauma. My favorite quote from this book was, "We're all dying, but that doesn't mean they weren't happy years. That wasn't a happy life." If I had to summarize this book in one sentence, it would be a beautiful heartbreak. And yes, I'm a masochist. I like pain. No other book has ever made me cry as much as A Little Life. No one has ever written about suffering and pain so beautiful. And no fiction has ever made me more grateful and uncertain, so simultaneously hopeful and hopeless about my own little life. A Little Life by 𝙎𝙎𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙑𝙎. 5 out of 5 stars, 11 out of 10 would recommend. Next, moving on to the non-fiction books. Speaking of great books I would recommend, another amazing book that I read was The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel? Wait, how do you pronounce it?
Morgan Housel.
The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. It is one of the best books, if not the best book I've read on money, finance, and investing. The 3 things I learned from this book are: 1. The most important factors in investing are psychology and patience. 2. How to be wealthy. Save more, spend less ego, and get the goalposts to stop moving. 3. Keep 20% of your assets in cash and invest whatever is left after spending in an index fund for a long time. I literally took down so many pages of notes, but if I had to choose one quote from the book, my favorite quote would be, "You might think you want a fancy car or a nice watch, but what you probably want is respect and admiration, and you're more likely to gain those things through kindness and humility than horsepower and cruise." And so my rating for The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel is 5 out of 5. The fourth book that I read was Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris, Jeff Warren, and 𝘾𝙍𝙈𝙈𝙁. And it's exactly what the name suggests. It's a how-to guide that teaches people who are fidgety and skeptical about meditation on how to meditate. And my favorite quote from this book is actually one by Sharon Salzberg, who said, "We don't meditate to get better at meditating. We meditate to get better at life." 3 lessons that I learned from this book are: 1. How to meditate. Pay attention to your breath, in and out. That's it. 2. Consistency matters more than length, and even 1 minute a day is enough. 3. When you're thinking too much or feeling certain emotions, it helps to note your thoughts and emotions. For example, in your head, you can note to yourself, overthinking, or fear, or anger. Although it tends to be a bit rambly at times, it's funny, practical, readable, and perfect for beginners. And so I would give Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics 3.5 out of 5 stars. Continuing along the lines of non-fiction books related to mindfulness and meditativeness, the fifth book that I read was The Gateless Gate by 𝙎𝙄𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏, also known as 𝙎𝙄𝙈 in Chinese. This is a collection of 48 Zen koans, and my favorite quote from The Gateless Gate is this: 𝙤𝙤𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏𝙎𝙏. In English, this is: the Great Way has no gates, but has 1,000 paths. The Great Way, or 大道, which is sometimes also written as 道, is a Chinese word that means way or path, and also represents a philosophy and doctrine that refers to the natural order of the universe. I'm not a Zen practitioner or a Zen Buddhist or a Taoist, but what I like about this quote is that I think this philosophy can apply to life as well. Because in many things in life, when you have a goal that you want to achieve, there's no one correct way to get to your destination, because there are so many different roads you can take to get to the same endpoint. I haven't exactly finished this book yet, which is why I said earlier that I only read 7.5 books this month. But as of now, from what I've read so far, I would give The Gateless Gate a rating of 2.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is The Prophet by 𝙤𝙤𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏. The Prophet by 𝙤𝙤𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏. Well, in spite of the title, I personally think that the topics talked about in The Prophet, love, work, the human condition, are all timeless and applicable regardless of your religion. My favorite quote from this book is: there are those who give with joy, and that joy is their reward. And there are those who give with pain, and that pain is their baptism. And there are those who give and know not pain in giving, nor do they seek joy, nor give with mindfulness or virtue. They give as in yonder valley the myrtle breathes its fragrance into space. What I found meaningful about this quote is that it tells us that true altruism is being able to give as freely as flowers give fragrance to the air. Not because of joy, not because of ego, not because of anything in return, but just because. Well, I wouldn't say that The Prophet is absolutely amazing or mind-blowing. It is a nice book and it sort of reads like poetry, so I would give The Prophet by 𝙤𝙤𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙏 a rating of 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is the second book that made me cry and absolutely bawl my eyes out. That is Crying in H Mart by 𝙤𝙁𝙉𝙉𝙉𝙗. This book is a love letter from the author to her mother, her Korean heritage, and Korean food. 𝙤𝙗's kimchi is the Korean version of 𝙁𝙁𝙉𝙉𝙉 Madeleine, and every line is deliciously written, like the literary equivalent of a mouth-watering feast of bachan. The book, which is centered around Michelle and her mother, tells a story about love and loss, happiness and sorrow, life and death, grief and hope. And really, Crying in H Mart left me crying too. If there are 2 lessons that I learned from this book, it would be 1. Treasure your parents while they are still living, and 2. Learn how to cook the food of your culture, family, and heritage. And so my rating for Crying in H Mart by 𝙤𝙁𝙉𝙉𝙉𝙗 is 5 out of 5. Last but not least, the final book I read in July was Devotions by Mary Oliver. This book is a collection of over 200 poems that Mary Oliver has written over the years, from 1963 all the way to 2015. My favorite quote is the line from the poem The 𝘾𝙍𝙀𝙊𝙄𝙎. I think this is the prettiest world. So long as you don't mind a little dying, how could there be a day in your whole life that doesn't have its flash of happiness? 3 things that I learned from reading this book. 1. Embrace nature. 2. Instructions for living are: pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. And 3. Look at the world with a poet's eye, and the world will be a more beautiful place. So, 4 out of 5 stars for Devotions by Mary Oliver. So, which were my favorites and not so favorites for the month of July? For my favorites, I would definitely recommend these 3 books. 1. A Little Life by 𝙤𝙤𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙗𝙗. 5 out of 5 if you like pain and you like to cry. But really, it's a very touching and really well-written story. Number 2, Crying in H Mart by 𝙤𝙁𝙉𝙉𝙉𝙗. 5 out of 5. Again, more crying. This book is a touching, real story on love, family, and the food descriptions are absolutely delicious. And number 3, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. 5 out of 5 again. I'm not kidding when I say this is the best book on money and finance and investment that I've read. For my not-so-favorite book, it would probably be The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by 𝙒𝙗𝙈𝙈. I give it a 2 out of 5 because the writing is pretty, but that's it. It's kind of disappointing because I've read Schwab's other books, like The Shades of Magic series before, which were decent, but unfortunately, I guess I just didn't really like this one. Well, that's all for my book reviews for July 2021, and thanks so much for watching. Comment and tell me what's the best book that you've read this month, and subscribe if you want to see more book-related content. Bye!